guys, so this is Pravalika and I'm here to do a quick little video on the basic grammar and punctuation so that we're a bit more familiar with it, and then I'm gonna go through the basic structures for interest in communications and reporting and analysis so that we get a little refresher on all of those, and then we can apply it pretty well when we're writing our essays. But yeah, let's get started. We're just gonna go through some nouns, verbs, all of them so that we can just refresh our memories, and then a few clauses. But to start off with, let's look at nouns. Please do write this down, because even if this is a video and you can't come back to it, it'll be a lot easier and you'll remember a lot better if you write down the notes that I'm writing down. So yeah, let's get back to it. Proper nouns. So we should be a bit familiar with this. It's essentially just referring to names of anything, right? It can be of anything. So an example would be Melbourne. But yeah, that's a proper noun. Pretty self-explanatory, so I won't spend too much time on it. And then we have the common noun, which obviously the most common type of noun, and it's just a general term used to refer to a category of people, places, all that stuff, right? So an example would be a goat, a teacher, right? So something like that. These two we're kind of familiar with. Now let's look at concrete nouns and abstract nouns. So a concrete noun is essentially a noun that's tangible, through senses. Right. So what that basically means is any noun, any object or any person or anything that you can touch, see, hear, feel. So anything through our five senses. So an example would be a table, a chair, or even a cat, right? So anything that can be seen, heard, touched, all of that, right? And then an abstract noun. So I am flying through these because we should be familiar with most of them, and I do want to get through a few things, which is why we're going a bit quickly. So an abstract noun is something that cannot be felt through our senses. This is a bit confusing, but essentially it's things like love, honesty, or even like truth. So we can't really see love, truth, honesty through our five senses, which is why it would be an abstract noun. And then the last type of noun is a concrete noun, and that's just used to describe a group. So an example would be a swarm, cattle, or like a murder of crows, right? So when you're referring to crows that are like more than two crows, you'd be like, oh, that's a murder of crows that's flying past, right? So that's essentially what it is. And then let's go to verbs. Right, so from here on, I will be speeding quite a bit. So a verb is an action. with meaning. So that means, so an example would be like jump. Right? So anything, or even like do. Because when you're doing something, it's like, I'm doing the dishes, right? Doing in that sentence is a verb. And next we have adjectives. An adjective is anything that's used to kind of, it's positioned prior to a noun. It is describing, right? And this is important because an adjective is only an adjective when it's describing a noun. So an example would be the orange jellyfish, and in this sentence, the adjective is orange, because as you see here, this jellyfish is a noun and it can be placed after, like prior doesn't really have too much importance, but it's essentially just any word that's used to describe a noun, right? So the orange over here is describing the jellyfish, which is a noun, which is why the orange becomes an adjective. So that's an adjective, and now we are gonna look at adverbs, right? And adverbs are a little bit confusing, so I'll give you a little trick. So it's essentially just an adjective for a verb, right? That's how I remember it. An adverb is an adjective plus a verb, which if you look at that, you basically get the definition, which means it modifies verbs giving details about anything related to it, really. About manner, time, place, etc. Right, so an example would be the tiger ran quietly. So in this case, this is a verb. And they're not talking about how the tiger is quiet. They're talking about how the running was quiet. Which is why this is an adverb and not an adjective, right? That's where I want you to be careful. So in this sentence, they're not describing the noun, which is a tiger. They're describing the verb, which is ran, which is why the running is happening quietly, which is why this would be an adverb and not an adjective, right? So that's done, and now we're gonna look at prepositions. So preposition is a function word that indicates connection between different aspects. Right, so what that means is if you're talking about time, you'd be looking at before, during, after. And if you're talking about a place, it would be something like at, on, over, under. And finally, if it's something like the manner of what's being done or how it's being done, you'd be looking at with, by, or through. Right, so that's a preposition. And after that, we're gonna go through pronouns. So pronouns, there's different types of pronouns, but for the sake of time, and I don't want to overload you guys with too much information, I will be going through personal pronouns, which are the types of pronouns that we are most familiar with, which is stuff like him, his, me, I, all of that stuff, right? So what it does is, that is not how you spell pronoun, my bad. Pronoun. Great. So it's used to replace the name of the person group. So that's a pronoun, and then after that we're gonna look at conjunctions. So conjunctions are very, very important for sentence types, clauses, all of that. So I will take a little bit of time with conjunctions. So a conjunction, there's two types of conjunction. So there's a coordinating conjunction, which can it can join independent independent clauses, so there's only 7 types of coordinating conjunctions, so like you can just memorize them. So if you guys are familiar with it, there is an acronym that can help you guys remember it that I'll go through now. So the acronym is fanboys. Let me just. So fanboys for the conjunctions is essentially just for, and, nor, but, or, yet, and so. So for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. Fanboys, right? So how it's used is you can look at she was late, so she ran to the bus. So we're going to look at clauses a little bit more clearly later on, but just for a quick example, she was late can stand by itself, and she ran can stand by itself, which is why we use the coordinating conjunction so to combine sentences and to combine the clauses and say she was late, so she ran. So that's a coordinating conjunction. And now we're going to look at subordinating conjunctions. Right, so subordinating conjunction is something that connects dependent clauses together. So it's literally anything that's not part of fanboys. Alright, so things like because. Right, so let's look at sentence structures really quickly, right? So the first sentence type is a simple sentence. And and it's essentially just one independent clause. Pendant clause. Yes, it's essentially just I woke up this morning. Yeah. And then the next type is a compound sentence. And a compound sentence is when two independent clauses are joined by a conjunction. And a complex sentence. Ooh, sorry about that. A complex sentence is one independent clause plus one dependent clause. And there's one more type. We're almost done with sentence types. There is also the compound complex sentence, which is essentially one or more independent and dependent clauses combined. Okay, so yes, these, let me just really quickly stick to the color code, guys. Yeah, okay, so these are the 4 types of sentence structures that you try to keep in mind as much as you can. And the reason I'm going through this pretty quickly is because it's important for you guys to have a mix of these types, right? Because if you have too many simple sentences, the essay gets kind of like it would be a very basic level essay because there's so many simple sentences. But also, if you have too many complex or compound complex sentences, it gets very overwhelming for the assessor, right? So the reason we're going through this is because we want you guys to have a variation. So we want you guys to have maybe like one simple sentence, 2 complex sentences, and a compound sentence in the introduction, right? That's what we want you guys to do, which is why we're going through this. So keep that in mind. Very important. And another thing is, yes, so we're done with like learning the types, and now we're gonna go into punctuation. And while I'm writing the title for punctuation, one thing for you guys to keep in mind is be careful with the tenses, because we want you guys to stick to the tenses as much as you can. So in formal essays, we use present tense, and unless you're explicitly referring to the future tense or the past tense, we want you guys to stick to the present tense, right? Present tense is very important. It's just a quick little note for you guys to keep in mind, because it's pretty important, right? But in punctuation, we're going to go through a few really quickly. So the first thing that we're going to go through is commas. So I'll just go through, because we know what a comma is. right here. But yeah, a comma it's used for lists, right? So when you're listing something, so it's like I went to the shops and I got milk, comma, bread, comma, chocolate, comma, strawberries, right? Full stop. So that's how a comma works when it's list. And this is gonna sound a little scary when I write it down, but I'll go through it in detail. So it's after an adverbial. Okay, so the second usage we have for commas is around embedded clauses. So what that essentially means is if you, I'm gonna shorten it really quickly, but essentially, so if you have an independent clause, dependent clause, and then an independent clause, as you can see here, I'm doing independent clause, comma, dependent clause, comma, independent clause, right? So whenever you can also do independent clause, comma, dependent clause, or independent clause, comma, independent clause. So, and like essentially whenever you're combining any types of clauses, you can use the comma. Or you can even do like either a dependent clause or an independent clause, comma, conjunction. So it would be independent clause, comma, conjunction, or you could do independent clause, comma, coordinating conjunction, comma, independent clause. All right, that's what comma is generally used for. There's also one more way they are used, but it gets kind of confusing, so I don't want to go into too much detail. But essentially, a trick for commas is try to like quietly say it out loud. So if you look at the sentence, after the storm, the town was silent. Right, so what I need to do is, there should be a comma around here, but I don't know where I'm going to put it, right? So what I do is I quietly say it out loud. I'm like, okay, after the storm, the town's quiet. The town's silent. So I'm going to do it one more time, but I have a feeling that the comma's going to go here because I instinctively kind of slow down after the storm, right? So let's read it out loud one more time. So it goes, after the storm, the town was quiet. The town was silent. Makes sense to me. It sounds right. So I'm going to keep the comma after the storm. But if you want, you could like even like trial and error if you want to, where it was like after the storm, the town was quiet. Doesn't really make sense, which is why I would definitely stick to after the storm. But it is important to not forget commas, because in a lot of your interest in communications essays, there were a lot of commas missing, right? So when you're writing, if it helps, very, very, very quietly say it out loud, like mumble to yourself, but not very loudly. At least when you're practicing, try to mumble to yourself so that you can identify where to put the commas. Obviously, for the actual test, mumbling would be considered cheating because you'd be talking out loud. So, but like if you do enough practice, it will become second nature, like knowing where to add the commas. So keep that in mind. Another thing is apostrophes, right? Apostrophes can get pretty confusing. Apostrophes, so they're essentially just like here, all right? So you can use them in two ways. You can use them for singular or plural. Right, so plural. So a singular would be students. Ooh. The students' books. So the difference is for the singular, you do student apostrophe s books, right? So what this is saying is there's one singular student and the books are owned by that one singular student. However, for the plural, the word itself is students, right? Because there's multiple students. So if we just put an apostrophe after the T, it's essentially the same as the singular. So there's no real way for us to tell the difference between one student and multiple students, right? So obviously the plural has to be outside, so it has to be after the S. And yeah, so let me just finish up the sentence. But yeah, that's how it would look for plural apostrophes, right? So for a plural noun, an apostrophe goes after the S, but when it's singular, it goes before the S. So the way you can remember it is just write down the word, and if it ends with an S, do it after the S, and then you write down the word here, and because there is no S, you can do apostrophe S. And another way you can also do, like, you also use contractions is, apostrophes is when there's contractions. So contractions is essentially when it is becomes it's, right? So it becomes it apostrophe s. A quick side note before we jump into reporting and analysis and its structure. A lot of people get confused between, so I'll do a little side note. So the difference between it and its is essentially, this is a contraction for it is, and then this is ownership. One way I like to remember is the apostrophe, you take out the apostrophe and you replace it with I, which makes it is. And for it's like so I look at a pencil case and I'm like, it's mine. So that sentence would look like this. Right, and for the contraction, it would look like it's raining heavily today, right? So that is the difference between it's and its, right? Keep it in mind. But we are done with grammar, punctuation, and all that basic recap. So we're gonna jump into the structure for reporting and not enough space. It's okay. Analysis. So what we're gonna do is 99% of the time you're gonna have to write a discussion and a conclusion, right? So I'll give you guys a rough structure. So let's start off with the let's start off with the discussion, and preferably you should have 2 paragraphs. So you should have 2 paragraphs. Paragraph 1 should be, did your results support your hypothesis? So that's the first question I want you to ask, and to essentially just answer, right? So that's the first question. And for that, so a sentence of a yes, because it's a yes or no question, you would kind of be expected to just do a yes or no. So be like, the results support the hypothesis because blank, right? Just like a brief run through, because the second question you have to ask yourself is, why did the results happen? So obviously, because this is science reporting and analysis, you have to use scientific jargon as much as you can. But yes, so paragraph 1, pretty simple, just 2 questions. And so the question 1 is, did your results support your hypothesis? Question 2 is, why did the results happen? So then we move on to paragraph 2. So paragraph 2 is also 2 questions, but this is a bit more complicated because it's where we talk about errors, right? So the first question is, what errors, problems happened? So obviously, when you're talking about errors, you'd have to talk about systematic errors and random errors, not just any random error, right? So it would be very specific to systematic or random, but problems is just anything that didn't work out, right? And then the second question that I want you to ask yourself is, how could you improve the experiment? Improve the experiment. And go into as much detail as you can with both of these. And if you have the time, it would be great to do this twice, right? Preferably maybe like 1 systematic error and 1 random error, right? This is the ideal world where we have enough time to do both, but that's how I want you guys to go about your discussions, right? This is a structure I would like you guys to stick to. And now let's look at the conclusion. So for the conclusion, so a conclusion is essentially just a brief explanation of what happened in the experiment. So what you're gonna do is the first step is you answer the aim in one sentence, right? So what that would look like is the aim was achieved because blah blah blah, or the aim was not achieved because blah blah blah. Most of the time the aim should be achieved because it would be an invalid experiment, so it should be achieved. So the conclusion should start off with the aim of whatever the aim was achieved, right? That's how the first sentence should look like. And the second step is state whether your hypothesis was supported. So that's the second question that I want you to look at. So what this means is that the hypothesis supported because with just I also want you to very briefly use data. Right? Like when I say very briefly, I just mean like literally just 2 to 4 data points talked about in like 5-6 words. That's all I want, right? The hypothesis plus data should be maximum 2 sentences, right? Don't need to be more than that because we can spend that time during the discussion where we're kind of expected to expand on stuff, because the conclusion is just like it says over here, it's just a brief explanation, right? But yeah, third and finally, mention the main trend. Or results. All right, so this is where you can, so the data that you mention over here can be linked to the trend, right? So you're gonna listen to you're gonna briefly use the data, and then the third point can be then expanded on by being so the data provided shows an increase, a proportionally increasing trend, etc., right? That is what I want your conclusion to look like. But yeah, this is the pretty simple summarized structure for reporting and analysis for the discussion and the conclusion, right? I am going a little bit fast, so if you guys have any questions, feel free to message us. So yeah, so now let's look at the structure for interests and communication. Right, so let's do a brief overview. Sorry about that. So let's do a brief overview of how we want the general structure to look like. So that would be the introduction, which is kind of expected to have 4 to 6 sentences, and I'll go through what those 4 to 6 sentences can consist of. So, and then we have 3 body paragraphs. Ideally, one talking about past, one talking about present, and one talking about the future. And finally, the conclusion. Right, so that's a brief overview and what it should look like. Preferably always have a conclusion. And if you're really running out of time, 1 sentence. Otherwise, the sentence structure, like the sentence amount for the conclusion, should also be 4 to 6 sentences, because you're essentially just reminding the examiner what your essay is about, right? So let's start off with the introduction. So first we'll be looking at the introduction. And in the introduction, we will have 4 steps. So the first step is the overview of the prompt, And it's kind of just like you're briefly talking about what the essay will discuss. At school, you would have been taught to start with "this piece will discuss," but ideally, don't start with "this piece" or "this essay will discuss," because it's kind of informal, and we want to be as formal as possible. So you kind of just try to talk about the overview without mentioning "this piece" or "this essay will discuss." And then step 2 is you briefly define keywords. This is if you have the time and the confidence to, but ideally this would lead to a very high ranking essay, right? So any keywords or ideas, right? So this is kind of just to make sure that everyone reading the essay is on the same page as you are, right? So that's why you define the keywords or the ideas given by the stimulus. And then that's when you talk about the contention, right? You guys seem pretty confident and familiar with the contention, but it's essentially just when you outline your stance on the issue. And finally, step 4 is you make your 3 points. So these are essentially just a summary, like 1 sentence maximum summaries of your body paragraphs, right? So 1 sentence each for each body paragraph. Definitely don't expect more than that. So essentially just your 3 topic sentences. So sentences wise, this would be 1 to 3 sentences. The ideal number is 3. But if you're really running out of time, 1 sentence should be fine. These 2 can be combined. So these 2 combined would be 1 to 2 sentences. And this would be at like 1 sentence. Like clearly this is 1 sentence. Preferably there's no more or no less for the contention. Right, so now let's jump into the body paragraphs. So the first body paragraph, we'll be talking about the past most of the time, right? Ideally stick to this, but if past, present, future structure doesn't work for you, do whatever works for you. But what worked for me best was the past, present, and future. And a few things that you can do is before I talk about the steps, a few things that you can do is discuss the history, of the prompt, discuss key discovery. So, and then the step 2 is discuss key discoveries, right? So the thing about this is it doesn't have to be from the stimulus or the prompt given to you. You can think about the research that you've done outside of this to talk about it. Okay, so and then it should be roughly, what did I say, how many sentences? So I didn't tell how many sentences, so it should be roughly 5 to 6 sentences. Right, so now let's look at the structure. So I want you guys to, regardless of whether you talk about past, present, or future, or like anything, I need you guys to stick to the teal structure. I'll go through this in detail for body paragraph 1, but we're gonna breeze through it for body paragraph 2 and 3, so please do listen up. So it's the topic sentence, which is the main idea of your body paragraph, and then you would do evidence. It can either be evidence from the stimulus or your own evidence from your own research that you've done, but it has to be correct, right? It can't just be any random like theory that you might have picked up on. It has to be like, if you're using an evidence, you have to use it correctly and you have to use it accurately, right? So the topic sentence and the evidence have to have a clear link, right? And you can show the clear link in the explanation. So so the topic sentence evidence have to have a clear link, and that can be done through the explanation, where you kind of expand on why the evidence proves the topic sentence, which would in turn prove the contention. Right, that's what I want you guys to do. And then there's finally the linking sentence. It's kind of just a reworded topic sentence, because what a linking sentence does is it reminds you what the main idea of the body paragraph was, and it kind of also leads you into the next body paragraph, which in this case would be the present. Right, so that's what body paragraph 1 does. Again, I'm going a bit fast, so please do message us if you have any questions. And now we're gonna look at body paragraph 2, which talks about the present, and you can showcase your awareness of modern science. So this is now kind of you showing off everything that you know about what's going on currently at the moment. Literally anything, any articles that you read about current sciences or technology. And this should also be roughly 5 to 6 sentences. And this should also have the same structure, which is the teal, right? So the teal structure should be used for this as well. And then one quick addition. The linking sentence should link to the prompt as well. But yeah, so now let's move on to body paragraph 3. Which can either be future or a link to other fields. And if you're very confident, you can do both. So what you'll be kind of expected to do for body paragraph 3 is, how will the next few decades look in relation to the prompt? Try to link to other fields. And lastly, this should also be 5 to 6 sentences. And yeah, the structure for this should also be teal. So yeah, structure should also be teal. Topic, sentence, evidence, explanation, linking sentence. And finally, we have the conclusion. Let me zoom out a little. Conclusion. So in this, it's very important to not introduce any new information. So any introductions of any new information should have already been done by now, because this conclusion just summarizes everything that we've talked about. So don't introduce new information. And also, yeah, if you have time, ideally should be 4 to 6, but if you want, it can all, like, if you don't have that much time, at least 2 to 3. So minimum of 2 to 3 sentences and a maximum of 4 to 6. Right, don't really need more than 6, because otherwise it does get a bit overwhelming for the assessor as well. And what you're essentially doing is you're restating the contention and summarizing the 3 paragraphs. But yeah, this is essentially it for this video, and I'll quickly summarize what we've done until now. So we looked at the types of nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, prepositions, pronouns, conjunctions. So the reason we did this is so that when we look at the clauses, everything comes together and we can identify them a lot better. And then we looked at the clauses, right? We looked at the subject, direct object, indirect object, and complements, so that we can understand the independent clause and the dependent clause, right? Which was then done to understand sentence structures, because sentence structures are literally just independent clauses and dependent clauses put together in different combinations. And we looked at sentence structures because you guys should have a variation of simple sentences, compound sentences, complex sentences, and compound complex sentences in your essays to make it a lot more like engaging, interesting, and like kind of to like hook the examiner, all right? And then we looked at punctuation, so literally just apostrophes and commas and how to use them accurately. And then we looked at the structure for reporting and analysis, specifically discussions, how to separate the 2 paragraphs into the discussions, and how to word your conclusion. And then we looked at the structure for intent, interest, and communications. So we looked at how to structure your overview, your introduction, body paragraph 1, body paragraph 2, body paragraph 3, and then finally how to word your conclusion, right? So this was done to kind of help you guys improve your structure, your grammar, punctuation. So please do try to apply this as much as you can in your next essays that you're going to write. And good luck. Message us if you have any more questions.